Hey everybody, and welcome. My name is Canadian Operator, and apologies for the abrupt and dramatic changes to scenery here. I have been away for a few days because I've not been feeling that great, and I wanted to make a video for you today, but my wife's day has been full of meetings. I do not want to go out there and distract her, and I don't want her stuff to be distracting me from making you a video today. So that's why we have crawled into the deep, dark depths of the bedroom to talk about Bill C21. That being said, if you find these kinds of videos helpful and enjoyable and would like to help support the work that I do here, I'd very much appreciate if you became a subscriber on the channel with notifications on. And of course, if you want to go above and beyond and have the means, we do also have a link to our Etsy store down below in the description, as well as, of course, the super thanks button under the video. If you haven't already, do come by our Discord. That's linked in the description as well. We'd love to have you there. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about this thing. All right, so to understand what's going on currently with Bill C21, we need to go a little bit into the past and talk about when Bill C21 started. In fact, I'm going to go even further than that. About 11 months before it was introduced and tabled by the Liberal government in April of 2021, going back all the way to May of 2020 when the Liberal government announced the OICs pertaining to handguns and rifles, or as they like to call them, assault-style weapons. Now, I've already done a video about this, and if you haven't seen it, you can check it out up there, but essentially the effect of this OIC was twofold. First of all, it was meant to ban, not freeze, all handgun sales, purchases, and transfers in Canada. It basically means that you are not allowed to buy or sell or transfer or even hand down to a child, for example, or a friend, any kind of handgun that you own. You can still technically use them, but once you die, the government then swoops in, takes your firearm, and gives no recompense to your grieving family for the actual perceived or sentimental value of that handgun, thereby, within the period of about 50 years or so, completely eradicating handguns in Canada, at least as far as ownership and responsible use by licensed and vetted gun owners goes. Again, the criminal element is not being touched here whatsoever. The second effect is with the rifles that happen to be painted black. We've talked about this already, otherwise known as assault-style weapons. Hundreds of those were also banned overnight, criminalizing their owners pretty much in an instant, and those were essentially just regular old semi-automatic center-fire rifles that the government seemed to think were more dangerous just because of the way that they looked. Now, the government, as part of this, did introduce a little bit of a leeway here, a little bit of a grace period, so to speak, where you wouldn't be criminalized or you wouldn't be held criminally liable for having these prohibited firearms, which are now prohibited. And unfortunately, they don't really have a plan beyond that, and I can prove that. The reason I say this is because they have extended this amnesty period twice now, and their federal confiscation program is nowhere to be seen. Of course, they'll call it a buyback program, but how can they buy it back from you if they've not actually sold it to you? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense there. Anyway, moving right along to Bill C21 and its tabling by the Liberal government in April of 2021. So at that point, they started to really want to push this thing through the House because they didn't really have a great argument, as you can imagine, aside from pulling on people's heartstrings on massacres like the École Polytechnique shooting in the 80s, and hoping that that would be enough to make them feel like they ought to ban guns. Now, of course, that's not to understate the horrific nature of what happened at École Polytechnique, and I just hate that the government is using these people 30 plus years later as a reason why guns should be banned, as opposed to coming out with a proper reason, like anybody with a solid argument should, right? Say, well, here's my argument, here's why I think X, Y, and Z should happen, and here is the information why. But the government has not presented any of this information, no witnesses, no corroborating evidence, and really not even a statistic to show that what they're trying to do is going to have any demonstrable effect on our public safety. So they pushed this bill through the House because they had nothing to stand on with respect to substantiating the bill, and as a result of that, there was almost no debate in the House whatsoever. Eventually, the bill made its way to the House Committee on Public Safety. When Marco Mendocino was still the public safety minister, he himself made an appearance, and many other people made an appearance there as well, including Rod Giltaca from the CCFR. There was Doctors Against Violence or something like that. I'm pretty sure Polly Sisovien was there. There was a number of other people. Chiefs of police were there. Everybody had their say. And I was thinking to myself, wow, the argument for not pushing Canada's gun control further really seems to be taking hold, because we already had a very strong firearms program, which was run by the RCMP up until that point. And unfortunately, none of this information was taken into account, because the government decided that it would be a great idea to then introduce 2 new amendments to the bill, literally after all of this testimony from all of these industry experts. And again, they did this because they wanted to stifle as much debate and discussion on them as possible, and they were intended to essentially ban all semi-automatic firearms like rifles and shotguns that had removable magazines with 5 or more rounds in them, and of course, whatever didn't fit that initial description would also be banned by name in Amendment G46. Now, those were so horribly planned that the government had no choice but to walk them back in the spring of this year. But fear not, of course, they have a new plan to basically change Bill C21 to make people feel like it's somehow better, like they've somehow come to their senses. And so at the beginning of the year, actually sometime around May, the government came out again and said, don't worry, the new Bill C21 basically only looks at firearms that were produced and designed after this becomes law, which means that people, your firearms are safe. The guys that already have guns, you guys are okay. We're not gonna mess with you, except they are. Because their idea behind all this is the first time when they introduced the amendments, they really screwed up. They showed their hand to everybody and they got bitten because they made a big mistake, right? And so now what they're doing is they're trying to make the bill seem like it's more future-looking, to kind of try to reduce the hit on people and make people feel like it's not that big of a deal. But the plan is to introduce, well, Marco Mendocino's plan, which he's not the safety minister anymore, thank God. The plan was to introduce his idea of bringing back the Firearms Advisory Council. So essentially what they're doing is that Firearms Advisory Council would take the place of the amendments suggesting to the government that they ought to ban all these different guns that were not captured by the forward-looking nature of Bill C21. I know this seems very complicated, and it was meant to be for a reason, so that you and I couldn't figure this out and couldn't come to the conclusion that they are doing exactly the same thing they tried doing last year, except they're a whole lot more sneaky about it. Now, in May 2023, that is when the third reading happened, and when the Senate came back from their break, they started deliberating on the bill at that point. Now, there was quite a bit of debate. Unfortunately, it didn't really go anywhere, and eventually the bill made its way into the Senate committee, where there was a lot more, I'd like to think, thoughtful debate on the bill. Now, it didn't start great, but eventually some of the members of the other parties, to my surprise, were starting to say, hey, this is, there's some of these amendments are really starting to sound pretty decent. Some of these really sound like amendments that we could vote for and we could put forward to make this bill better. And as a legal licensed gun owner, I was thinking to myself, okay, so the bad news is Bill C21 is still going to be here to stay, at least for a little bit. But the good news is, hey, these guys are, thinking about things. They're putting their partisanship aside, and they're finally looking at this objectively and trying to figure out whether this is actually going to have any demonstrable impact on public safety, and making amendments, or at least voting for amendments, that would kind of make some thoughtful changes to the bill. I was a little bit hopeful about this, but unfortunately my hope was very soon dashed, as every single one of these guys, from the Bloc to the NDP to the Liberals, of course, decided just to vote down every single amendment in the Senate committee, which was incredibly disheartening, because some of them had some interesting things and sometimes positive things to say about some of these amendments that were proposed, and yet they showed just how incredibly unwavering and blind their loyalty was to their given political factions by summarily voting down every single one of them. That brings us to basically today, where we're at the point now where clause by clause consideration within the Senate committee is done. And we are now just waiting for that sword of Damocles to finally fall, with the bill finally receiving royal assent, which is honestly just a little rubber stamp from the Governor General saying, yep, this is now law. And while we still hold out hope that common sense will reign sometime in the near future, at least for now, this is what we're dealing with. So I hope that this video has given you a little bit of food for thought. Again, I'm not a professional, I'm not a politician, and I am certainly not a lawyer. If you found the video helpful, please do share it with other people. Become a subscriber. It really does make a big difference. And consider using the super thanks button down below if you'd like to buy me a hot or cold beverage, your choice. Not to mention, we do have a Discord down in the description if you'd like to come and join that very quickly growing community, as well as my link to my little Etsy shop where I sell my own custom-made designs just for you guys, including this, which will be a thing pretty soon because it's actually been requested. So thank you so much. I hope to see you in the next video. Again, hope you found it helpful. I appreciate all the love, and hope to see you in the next one, okay? Until then, happy shooting.